Conscience Podcast, Episode 185. Artistic Director, Choreographer, Multidisciplinary Artist, and Producer, Sandra Laronde.
I really believe that we do carry the spirit of the land wherever we go. And, the Western canon is once you leave home, you can never return. And I would say the Indigenous canon is actually home never leaves you.
I remember Sandra Laronde contacted me when I was running the Interarts office at the Canada Council in the early 2000s. Asking me, where does my Red Sky Production performance company fit in the council's suite of programs and silos? Claude, I combine Indigenous dance, theater, music, media, and more, but rarely the same way. Now, I'm happy that the council and Red Sky and Sandra figured things out, and I've always been amazed by Sandra's imagination, her spirit, her entrepreneurship, and her skills as a connector. And I've had the pleasure of crossing paths with Sandra many times over the years on assessment committees or at festivals or at Indigenous arts gatherings. And in particular, I have fond memories of having been invited by a group of Indigenous women arts administrators, including Sandra, to gatherings where we sang and danced and held talking circles and listened to each other's needs and offerings and listened to the world around us. So I was very pleased on June 18th, 2024, to be able to spend some time with Sandra in her backyard in Toronto. And I wanted to focus on her debut novel, She Holds Up the Stars, which was published by Anik Press in August 2022. After reading the book, I wanted to know more about this story of a young Indigenous girl searching for a sense of home, who finds strength and courage in her gifts, her deepening connection to the land, and her own cultural awakening. And during the conversation, Sandra admitted to me that it was partially based on her own life, which is not surprising. And I like the way she talks about the book.
I just wanted something that was, yes, had sadness in it and but also had like humor and saw the world and a positive reflection of who we are as Indigenous people, and a sensitive kid that actually could see the world in a certain way and the world respond to her in a way, and that her world wasn't just focused on humans. It was really more spirit-centric. It was really about everything that is alive in the world, whether that be rivers and trees or the wind or the lake or, a bird, that all of these beings are alive and well.
Now, we also spoke about the launch of the Aki Creators platform, and I had the pleasure of attending the night before to its launch. And Aki Creators is a portal of stories rooted in Indigenous wisdom, arts, and a shared love of the land. And of course, during our conversation, I asked Sandra, as I do all of my guests, about the role of art in the ecological crisis, and here is part of what she said.
I think art helps us to connect or reconnect, and connect spiritually, connect emotionally, connect even intellectually. connect in all the different ways that we need to connect to the environment and to the world around us, and of course each other. Of course, artists have a kind of an antenna to them where we're often sort of foreseeing what's going to happen next. Artists are the antenna of the world. And, some of these movies that are sci-fi or books, there's elements of truth in them. And there's warnings.
Another topic that I found fascinating is Sandra's views on artificial intelligence. And here's an excerpt of what she said.
And, the big concern in the AI space, the big concern in the digital space, is that right now it is in the hands of very few people. Very few people are prompt engineering, knowing how to engineer it. So there's a lot of big companies, and there's a lot, and the strong voice in the digital sphere is still a white, privileged male voice. Only 14% of women are in AI. And as an Indigenous person, my mind goes to, this could potentially be another robust form of colonization if we don't get in there and sway the narrative and change the narrative and transform the narrative. If we just leave it, I think this is a great peril, and not only to us, but to the world.
And there are very many good examples of films and digital artworks using artificial intelligence on the Aki Creators platform. As we sipped a bit of wine in her backyard, life was unfolding around us. Planes and helicopters were zipping by, but also we were surrounded by trees and the whisper of leaves and birdsong. And Sandra reminded us that humans are a part of nature, and that art can help us look up at the stars and wonder what was and what could be.
Hey, Sandra, thank you for joining me on the Conscient Podcast.
Great to be here.
It's been a while that we've been talking over the years.
Mm-hmm.
I remember once we went out on a journey with Louise Prophet LeBlanc, the at the time called Aboriginal Arts Administrators Group, and I was the only non-Indigenous person there, and I was welcomed, and there was so much kindness in that group, and I learned so much by doing ceremonies with other people, and we've been talking over the years about art and technology, and there's a couple of things that I really want to focus on today. There's a book you wrote a couple of years ago that I really loved and touched me, and so I'd like to know more about that. And just yesterday I went to the most wonderful celebration of Aki Creations, and so we want to talk about that as well and get people to do what I did, which is to register and to look at these wonderful works of Indigenous art. But let's start where we usually start, which is the beginning of your life and who you are, where you come from, and then we'll take it from there.
So I'm Sandra Laronde, and I am from Temagami, which is in northern Ontario. And I grew up in this incredibly expansive land, and I really think it's informed everything for me. I grew up with 1,600 islands and 3,200 kilometers of shoreline, 2,000 miles of shoreline, and 500 people. So expansive, beautiful land and water. We could see northern lights. We could see the stars at night. We can see the stars that look like they're in the bottom of the lake because the lake is so clean and clear. And a very, very beautiful way to grow up, and very connected to land and our homeland of the Nadakimanan, our homeland of the Tupigman Anishinaabe, the people of the deep water where I'm from. So that I can see has truly informed so much of what I do, so much of what I'm interested in. And I just feel like, I carry that wherever I go, and it's infused in everything I do. And so everything I like to do has it seems to have like this big scope to it. And I really think that's because of the way my eye could travel across land when I was young. I could travel across the water, could see down the lake, or, up to a tall tree, or, across, and fearlessly go into the bush or the forest and try and find the wildest animal I could. I'd go looking for them. Like, well, I want to go find.
Or they would find you.
No, they never did. I would hear like the branch break, Claude. I would hear the branch break, and I'd run toward it, hoping it's the biggest creature I could find. And it never was like that. But so I was really, really fortunate to grow up like I did. Yeah.
Well, we're in your backyard here in Toronto, and you have been, yesterday you said there was 24 years of the Red Sky Performance Company. That's quite a legacy.
It is.
and still going, right? You're
yes.
Not,
yes.
And maybe you're just getting started. I don't know.
In some ways, yes.
But maybe just so that people know what is Red Sky, just so that they have an understanding of that company, and then there's projects in and around that.
So Red Sky Performance is a contemporary Indigenous company in theater, dance, music, and media. And also, and of late, I guess it's in the world of media, but of late into the digital world, which I find highly interesting. And but we basically create original work, and we tour it all across Turtle Island, all across Canada and United States, into all sorts of communities, urban, rural, remote, reserve communities, as well as touring to countries as far-flung as like Mongolia, or China, or New Zealand, Australia, etc. So, but it's really about creating new original work and expanding the Indigenous canon of Canada. And that's primarily what we do.
And the book that I want to talk about, because it's called She Holds Up the Stars, it is for a younger audience, and I don't think artistic boundaries matter to you very much. I've seen your work. It's always interdisciplinary. It's always connecting through all kinds of ways. Why did you write a book?
I wrote a book because when I was growing up, I didn't have such a book. There were no books that were... There were a few books because at that time, Indigenous people were not being published. We had the stories and we had the writers, but we just weren't being published. And so the few stories that I did read about Indigenous people were very, very sad, and with good reason, because of all that we've been through. But I just wanted something that was, yes, had sadness in it, and but also had like humor and saw the world and a positive reflection of who we are as Indigenous people, and a sensitive kid that actually could see the world in a certain way and the world respond to her in a way, and that her world wasn't just focused on humans. It was really more spirit-centric. It was really about everything that is alive in the world, whether that be rivers and trees, or the wind, or the lake, or, a bird, that all of these beings are alive and well. And it's about her relationship with that world. And so I just wanted to tell a story that I felt was really important, and to give a gift. To give a gift to the world that I sorely needed and could not find. And I just felt, so I was really writing to people who were 12, 13, 14, 15 years of age, and not remembering, but being back in that time, and sort of looking out through her eyes at that time. And so She Holds Up the Stars. Half of it is true, based on my life, and half of it is fiction. And it was really fun to blur those lines and to augment certain things or to tell it like it is.
Like helicopters going by.
I know it's a plane. There's a plane going across the sky right now in my backyard through the trees. We can hear the plane. And, that's why I wrote it, really. And, you're right about this blurring lines, because at one time, YA novels, young adult novels, that genre did not even exist until 1960. And that genre came into being with S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders. And then suddenly, Huckleberry Finn or Catcher in the Rye and all these incredible novels were now, determined to be YA. But before that, everybody read those kind of books. Everybody, not just youth. So I don't know if that was a good thing to do, because it set this demarcation, this line, this boundary of what is considered for youth and what is considered for adult. Whereas prior to 1960, it was open to everybody reading these classics,
Well, when I read the book, at first I read it as a 64-year-old, and that didn't work very well for me because I was being analytical and blah, blah, blah. And I said, let's read it as like a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
And then it really resonated and was so much fun, because there are a lot of universal things of just young people, whether they're Indigenous or not. And there's obviously specific things, references to residential school and systemic racism, and that's very clear. And I would say poetic in the sense that you don't you bring it into the story as a fact, but also in a way that is, I think, easy for a young person to feel.
Yes.
Like they'll feel the sadness, they'll feel the joy, but they don't necessarily put the book down. They kind of go further into it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the spiritual side, and then I was just transported by the story, where it went, and the metaphor, and and also the simplicity, right? Because had you make it more intellectual in the sense of, complexity, it might not have been as accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So the 13-year-old in me really thanks you for the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great to hear. I wanted to just write a story that didn't necessarily have to come from issues, and to just tell the story of a young girl, going back to the reserve, living with her grandmother, trying to find what happened to her mother, and she discovers this rancher boy, and who sees the world completely antithetical to her, and anything, and it's, he's on the other side of the fence, and of course that fence is a metaphor of the fence that does exist in Canada between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Everything is a metaphor, everything is an analogy, and you're just telling the story. And I love that. And so I just wanted to move beyond a story that was sort of issue-based or talking only about our issues. Because if we just tell the story, sing our songs, dance our dances, those things come into play. We don't have to go looking for them. Let them come through the back door. Let them come through, they don't always have to be hit on the head, and because what happens is then people actually go on the journey with you a lot further actually. And humor, I love the humor of her savviness and her smarts. But I love the humor, and like the old school humor and sort of the newer humor, of Cookham, who's essentially my mother,
Or everybody's mother.
Or everybody's mother. She's so funny and sort of disarming and straight shooter, direct and lovely, and you can't help falling in love with her. And the relationship between her and her grandmother, and the relationship between her and this wild horse that was so-called untamable. And one of the things I was interested in terms of a thematic was looking at the things that break in life. We break a horse. We don't have to break a horse in the way that we did. the breaking of children, the breaking of promises, the breaking of treaties, the breaking up, the breaking down, all the kinds of ways that humans break things is one of the themes that I follow throughout without ever really it being even like obvious to people. When I say it, they say, oh yeah, of course, I get it. But, like I could not write in my synopsis for young people, this is a book about the things that people break, but inherently not children, but young people know these things. And they're so smart. They're still so emotionally connected to the world and to the environment. One of the biggest things when children go to sleep at night, there was a survey that was done was what's one of the biggest things that you go to sleep at night worrying about? And they said the environment, climate, nature.
Animals, yeah.
They worry about all those things. And because they're still so attuned and connected. And I love that high EQ of young adults, of children, and some adults get to keep that throughout their life if it doesn't get hammered out of them.
Or art can bring it back.
Yes.
A book, a play, a dance show. Well, it's interesting you talk about break because I think we're breaking the planet, which is Mother Earth, and when you hurt your mother, you're hurting yourself. And this podcast has been for like 4 years now, looking at art and the ecological crisis. And what do those words mean to you? The idea of the role of art in relation to environmental and climate change and those kind of complex.
I think art helps us to connect or reconnect and connect spiritually, connect emotionally, connect even intellectually, connect in all the different ways that we need to connect to the environment and to the world around us and, of course, each other. Of course, artists have a kind of an antenna to them where we're often sort of foreseeing what's going to happen next. We're foreseeing what's around the bend, whether around the bend means, 10 years from now or 100 years from now, or, I think there's a real, Marshall McLuhan, among others, said, artists are the antenna of the world. And, some of these movies that are sci-fi or books, there's elements of truth in them. And there's warnings. There's like warnings in them for us to consider. And a lot of the things that we're talking about now, and when I think about in my, our ancestors and Indigenous peoples, and the values that Indigenous people have upheld since forever, it's imagine if those values were not upheld in this time. And the reason why, you know what I mean? Like they fought for this. They even died for it, for us to be able to live the life that we are all living, not just Indigenous people, but really all people. And there's not enough knowledge about that, really. Because when we think of ancestors, people just think, oh, Indigenous ancestors only. But no, Canada is the way it is because of the Indigenous knowledge, the Indigenous wisdom, the Indigenous values that upheld and made things, the different kind of worldview that we see, things that more and more people are embracing. And unfortunately, it's on the brink of the sixth extinction. So now we're pushed to have to, understand, and I don't mean understand just in an intellectual way, but to come to terms with our connection to the land and nature in a very, very deep way, and to reconsider things. COVID-19 didn't just happen. It came at a time, I think, when we needed the incredible wake-up call that it is. So and that's Mother Earth. That's nature. You know. I mean, what do we need? What do we need? What do we need to be able to understand that? You know. So I've always been very, very drawn to, and it's not just because I'm an Indigenous person. I think if I was a non-Indigenous person, I would be drawn to the philosophy and the worldview of Indigenous people and how we view our connection. And it's so needed. You know?
Well, you talked about warnings, but in many Indigenous cultures there are prophecies and there are stories that predict the future based on patterns of the past, and I don't know that much about it, but I've read and I've enjoyed. I think we're very enriched by the many sharings of culture that we have in Canada, and so-called Canada, because Canada is a construct, right? And it's actually a very short-term thing, and it might not last.
Yeah.
Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about Aki Creations, because I'm interested in the generosity of your organization in sharing the work of others, right? Because the digital format, the digital platform is a way to access many different types of art forms. Sometimes there's compromise because you're looking at a show that's shot with a camera, but a lot of what you're doing is using artificial intelligence. And the show I saw last night with the wonderful sort of alien Indigenous woman falling to the earth. I just love, by the way, the way she fell down so slowly and so poetically.
Yes.
I saw it online, and I saw it last night in the bar with all these wonderful people celebrating this achievement. And I see a through line in your work, right? I've seen many of your shows, the book, this film. There's always a sense of invitation, and you talked about that earlier. So, anyway, what is Aki Creations? What is it, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Well, Aki
I'm going to
Creator.
serve myself some more wine.
Yeah. Sure.
It's like the Brave New Wave
I
in
know.
the 1980s. Let's say, hey, want
Totally.
some more wine?
Yeah. Well, Aka Creators is a digital platform that was built to basically accelerate Indigenous content in the digital space. There's and not only to bring our stories to the digital space, and there's an opportunity there, I find, because AI is not going to go away. The digital space is not going to go away anytime soon. And so we need to get into that space and populate in there and prompt engineer AI so that AI understands, And a lot of people think, oh, AI, but, we forget sometimes it's humans that program the robot. It's humans that program AI, and it's only doing what it's been told by the human beings. And so how I work in AI with the film Land Dances Us, which was featured in Aki Creators, is a hybrid model. So we're rendering it through AI, but there still needs to be the human touch to give it that warmth, to give it that beauty, because AI is very unruly, and it will kind of go in all these different ways that you don't intend it to, and it doesn't make sense sometimes. So it's because it's still learning. It's still learning from humans. So, but basically, back to your question, Aki Creators is, I'm really interested in the intersection of Indigenous wisdom, art, and land in the digital space in Aki Creators. So it's really shaping the narrative there in the digital space, and then inviting other Indigenous creators, content creators, to come into that space and also create and populate stories, the distinct stories that there are from Indigenous people across Canada, Turtle Island, and globally. So those are very, very rich stories, and a lot of those stories are so visually compelling, and the high caliber of the visual narrative that comes out of our stories. That's the one place where filmmaking and AI can really serve and sort of come to that strength of our artistry, our ethos, the epicness of our storytelling, of our mythology, if you will. And a lot of those stories still have not been told in Canada or seen or even definitely not visually represented still, so that's very exciting space. So that's basically what Ake is. It's a digital platform that's really looking at the resurgence of Indigenous people and then the thematic of wisdom, art, and land. I'm really interested in that intersection.
And I guess you'll be curating more and more artists
Yes.
and bring them onto the platform.
That's right.
And of course, inviting people to view and interact with, and it's a pay kind of situation. And I think it's perfectly fine, to stream and to enjoy a range. And I'm sure there'll be more and more content
Yes.
as it evolves.
Yeah.
But one of the things that struck me last night at the reception party at the
Revival.
Revival, because you
Yes.
said that's where you launched Red Sky.
Yeah.
So that was so touching. You said that AI, or something, I'll quote you.
Yeah.
You can bring it back to me. You talked about how AI is a good way for Indigenous storytelling because it allows some kind of extension, or what did you mean by that?
Well,
Or maybe I didn't get it right, but
Yeah.
that's what I got out of it.
AI, the digital space has an opportunity for us. Imagine if there is all of these stories that are, created by Indigenous content creators that are out in the world. And imagine if those stories can somehow actually come down and materialize, because we didn't quite get it right in Canada around the Indigenous stories and learning from that from the beginning. Now we're coming to that. It's only been in the last, 15, 20 years that this has really been happening. 20 years? A few handfuls of really strong companies, and then growth. So I find that there's an opportunity there, and to reach a lot more people than you can if you go to a venue and you're in a 400-seat venue and, you sell out, but, maybe you have 10 shows, and that's great. But, that's still not meeting the scads of people that you can when you're online. So I just think it could accelerate the Indigenous stories and the Indigenous worldview. And I really want these kind of conversations, kind of what you're doing in a way, talking about land, talking about climate change, talking about the environment, talking about what we can do as people, talking about what, these are really, really important conversations to be having. And I guess what I'm interested in is what is that from an Indigenous perspective, and I know they meet and they intersect, and that's great, as they should. But I'm really interested in those kind of conversations being available to people, whether it's more talking about reconciliation or talking about resurgence, or talking about reconciliation is actually another form of colonization. And, the big concern in the AI space, the big concern in the digital space, is that right now it is in the hands of very few people. Very few people are prompt engineering, knowing how to engineer it. So there's a lot of big companies, and there's a lot, and the strong voice in the digital sphere is still a white, privileged male voice. Only 14% of women are in AI. And as an Indigenous person, my mind goes to, this could potentially be another robust form of colonization if we don't get in there and sway the narrative and change the narrative and transform the narrative. If we just leave it, I think this is a great peril and not only to us but to the world. If there's only one dominant voice that is in control of the digital or AI.
Well, just this morning, it's been a big day for
Yes.
me. I was participating in a panel with SAPAMO, which is the Cultural Plurality Arts Movement in Ontario. So Kevin Ormsby invited me to moderate a panel on AI. And there was a black artist named Sean Caesar who was there and talked about how black voices have faced systemic racism, but also have an opportunity to change the narrative, to program differently, to be aware of the biases of the different AI systems, and to literally change the story. And there's a research project at Concordia University that I mentioned this morning. I think it's called Abundant Intelligences. And it's an Indigenous specific, but multiple Indigenous specific, because there's no one Indigenous voice, as you well know.
Yeah, that's right. There's a diversity.
There's a great diversity around the world, even in Canada, so on. So I think they're kind of fighting back, right? There's that kind of, let's put content in that's going to help shape a more thorough, a deeper understanding of what humanity has been.
Yes.
Because a lot of it is a historical context, and from what I understand from AI. I'm a little skeptical at AI. I'm happy that you've embraced it, because by embracing it, you face the challenges and you kind of shape it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that it's a problem because it is being capitalized, as you say. But here we are talking about it. Here we are doing something about it with Aki Creations. And I think there will be other opportunities for artists to either choose to use it or not. You might choose not to. But it'd be good to say why. You say, I'm working with this other technology, but when you work with a tool, any given tool, you got to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And its strengths and weaknesses. So there's a place for training. There's a place for literacy around artificial intelligence. In fact, I'm not even sure it should be called artificial intelligence. I think it might change term, because is it really an artificial intelligence, or is it the bringing together of human intelligence through a technology that is essentially organic, right? Because these are the semiconductors and all the technologies, they're part of the earth, right? So how do we work our way through the fact that we've created this terrifying tool because it can mislead us, and yet it might help us?
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to when the computer came.
Right.
People were very scared of it, and that a lot of ill will would happen, and a lot of good. And it's true. Both do exist. They still exist with the computer. I asked my mother what she thought about the computer, and she says, "Oh, it's the devil." And I'm like, you know what? You have a point there. It kind of has that aspect to it, but it has a lot of good and that could come from it. But the biases that exist in the coding of AI is the problem. There is a code bias for sure, and a certain worldview and a certain narrative that is rolling out of there. But I do have concerns. I do have concerns, and I do have like you, but I also can see the assets of it too. But I also, they're equally weighted with the concerns, I have to say. They're real.
Well, I keep raising the environmental impact of all these, servers and machines and the extraction of minerals. And I wish we were more aware, because some are, of the price that we pay for these technologies. This technology today allows us to talk to people all around the world, and that's really a good thing, right? It's relatively low carbon footprint, relatively.
Yeah.
And so is there a way, this is one of the beautiful things this morning, Alika, sorry, I haven't pronounced her name right, who is the executive director of the NIA Center for the Arts, talked about slowing down. And a lot of my friends talk about that. And it's hard to do because we live in an economy where it's rough. The theme of the festival that I attended this morning was precarity. You know, the precarity of the artist's life in a place like Toronto where housing is so expensive. You know, how
Yes.
can, if artists can't live from their work, they're not going to create their art. They're going to go do something else. Right? So that precarity needs to be sort of juxtaposed with the challenges that we face, you know. And so how can we lower the carbon footprint of our use of technologies? How can we slow things down a little bit while still enjoying the benefits of communication, which is
Yeah.
basically what these tools are doing, right?
Yeah.
They're allowing us to connect with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, it just seems like produce, you know, get something on stage, get something done, get something, you know, wrapped up. It's true. And
Well, the funders ask for it. It's like built into the system.
it's totally, yeah, churn. It's a churn. And you got to prove it each year that you're doing something. But I would agree that process is a very, very important piece. And, you know, there almost should be more emphasis on the process in some ways. You know, it's kind of like a good cooked meal. It takes so much time to prepare together, and people bond, and there's conversation, and then, you know, and then it's done. And then there's the feast. But it may not last as long as the process did. But I think there's something to that about the process. And that's, you know, with cultural protocol in Indigenous culture, that is about kind of like, we're going to talk about a process here, and it has to start this way. And these are the kind of steps. These are kind of what we want to do. It's really about relationship building, ultimately, and building trust, relationship, reciprocity, getting the values aligned. That's really what cultural protocol is doing. And that there's a higher power involved as well. You know, I mean, those are all good things. And, but I get it. Like, it's so hard to slow down in the urban environment, especially. And when you're not connected to nature, it's really, really easy not to slow down. It's really easy to keep going. But as soon as I'm around water and trees and that, I just tend to slow down naturally, you know? And so I would agree with that. And I guess everybody's different, how much to produce, how much process is involved. I think we need to, rather than sort of ascribing like this is what this person should do in this company and this is this, maybe there should be a little more latitude in terms of how we do it and what's important to different companies. You know?
Well, there's a note to funders. I used to work in the funding system, and I used to listen.
I remember that.
Yeah, I listened to artists, and I tried to adjust programs, and eventually, you know, the funders got a lot of things right. You know, the Indigenous program,
Yes,
creating
totally.
knowing and sharing at Canada Council is
Yes.
important, and there are many others in the works. Sandra, I want to end with the power of storytelling, because you might not remember this, but you told me a story once about your homeland or home space of Temagami and the deep lakes and the beautiful trees. I don't know why, but that stuck with me. I'm from North Bay, which is just a little bit south
right.
of it.
That's right, eh?
And I just could imagine that space, those deep waters. And of course, I've always wanted to visit Maine. Now that I'm retired, maybe I will. But storytelling, what can we say? You know, it's just when the story enters your body or your spirit, it kind of stays there, and they kind of guide you. There's something about it, right?
I totally believe that. I think even, you know, through osmosis, even with land, and imagine being a babe on land and crawling around and no filter, everything's so porous and open and available, and that land and the spirit of the land just seeps inside and gets right inside, and you are, from that moment, connected, you know. And we are nature, of course, but I really believe that we do carry the spirit of the land wherever we go. And, you know, my novel is, in a way, it's kind of about that, because She Holds Up the Stars is about, you know, the Western canon is once you leave home, you can never return. And I would say the Indigenous canon is actually home never leaves you. It's a very different way of thinking about it.
I think we'll leave our listeners on that note. Thank you,
Thank
Sandra.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Claude.
lots of fun.
It's always a pleasure. I love talking to you.
Well, we'll talk again. I've been known to do second and third episodes.